So welcome everyone to Voices with Vervaeke. I'm very pleased to be joined by Rachel Hayden. I met Rachel. She is a patron through my Patreon account, and we've had some amazing discussions. Both her professional life is deeply relevant to my work, or maybe a better way of putting it is my work is deeply relevant to her professional life, and my work is, she said, has been deeply relevant also to her personal life, her existential life. And I found talking to Rachel deeply insightful, and that what she has to say, I think, is valuable and can be valuable to a large number of people. So I'm very happy that you're here, Rachel. And so can you just take some time, give us a bit of your biography and maybe touch on those two different domains, and you can pick whichever one you want to focus on first, the relevance to, the professional work you're doing, the dojo, things like that. And then also the personal relevance, and take it whatever in order you wish and just unfold it as organically as possible. So feel very welcome. And I'm just so interested to hear what you have to say.
Oh, thank you so much. It is, I'm just completely excited to be here and be part of these conversations that have, meant so much to me, but also have afforded me so much of my own aspiration and really rekindled a desire for wisdom and personal growth and transformation in me. So, by way of introduction, I guess I would start with the two processes I feel like I'm involved in right now. One being, probably, I guess the search for wisdom would be the way to encompass that. Your work and others have definitely, been a big part of that. Oh, I'm missing your video
Nope.
there a little bit. Okay, it's cut back in.
Yeah. It's been a big part of that, so please continue.
Yeah, it's been a big part of that. And I'm, just beginning, I feel like, in life to realize what the enormity of such a quest for wisdom actually entails.
Right.
So I've started to kind of, I feel like I'm setting out on that journey. And then simultaneously, concurrently with that, I'm in the middle of a gender transition.
Right.
And so those two happened at roughly the same time in my life. And I'm seeing a great deal of interaction between those, especially, from the direction of applying, people's work on wisdom to gender transition and trying to navigate that more effectively, and feeling like the as big of a thing as gender transition is in one's life, and I'm not going to diminish that whatsoever because it's huge. I've gotten the sense that becoming like a wise person or aspiring to become a wise person is much larger and more open-ended, of a quest.
Right.
So I feel like the nature of gender transition is for me at least a little more close-ended. There's presumably some kind of endpoint somewhere, but it also could afford me both more of a sense of aspiration toward other forms of self-development, self-improvement, as well as insight into the nature of myself, particularly from like the so-called emptiness of a Buddhist perspective on the self. And so that, latter journey has really given me those two insights so far, even though I'm still midway through it. So, as much as I feel like enmeshed in confusion and still kind of like, what's my endpoint here? What even is gender? It's becoming more diffuse as I seem to approach my goal. My life is improving through both of these endeavors, through gender transition and through the effort to kind of like understand what would it be to be wise, what would it take, how do I reorganize my life in such a way that I've developed that ecology of psychotechnologies and community to bring about that greater transformation.
Mm-hmm. That's really wonderful. What really caught my interest? I mean, first of all, you're a wonderful person to talk to, so that caught my interest. But the way what you just said, you have these two deeply aspirational, transformational processes going on, and you see them as significantly relevant. And you even, if I understood you correctly, you see the gender transition as encompassed within the broader wisdom transformation. And that struck me as a very like very novel in the sense that I hadn't heard it articulated that way ever before. I mean, there's lots of discussion, of course, going on right now about gender and about a lot of things, but very few, I don't think I've heard it until I heard it from you about trying to situate those two transformational processes into a deep relationship with each other. So that's very, I mean, it's very thought-provoking. Can you say a little bit more about what that connection feels like and what your reflections are? I understand what you're saying. You're in mid-process and there's confusion. Nobody's expecting you to be a sage, but you know what insights are emerging? What clarity are you getting? What intelligibility about the relationship between these two transformational arcs?
Yeah, you know, it when I started you know, coming to terms with what was going on with me, I'd had a couple of different experiences. I guess I'll start with these, and it'll start to illustrate how the general, I guess you'd call like folk models of gender, maybe would have fallen flat for me and have not afforded me any kind of real wisdom in the sense of
Right.
transition. The two experiences that kind of I guess happened sort of back to back and led to my sense of growing gender dysphoria, or like a dissatisfaction with my gender assignment in life. Where one, kind of a mystical experience in which I got a sense that I'd never gotten before of the, I don't want to call it the essence of generosity because that sounds, you know, a little pretentious, but the depth of generosity that was possible in one's life. And prior to that, I'd kind of thought of generosity as just, you know, you have something and you give it to someone who doesn't have it, whether it's, you know, wisdom, money, you know, an extra dog or whatever it is that you have. And this mystical experience, to be kind of brief about it, opened this door into this sense of generosity that was just boundless, just completely boundless, not, you know, in the sense of a person who's better off giving to someone who is less well off, but more in the sense of like a parent just, you know, like spontaneously wiping the nose of their child. You know, there's no boundary there. It just happens. There's not a sense of like, oh, I'm doing this great thing because I'm wiping someone's nose. You know, it's much more natural.
So
And that experience
sounds very agapic. It sounds like agape in a lot of ways.
definitely, deeply so. It felt like this wonderful, like, heart opening,
Right.
and yeah, the sense of what I now know as agape. Hadn't really considered that at the time. And it stuck with me, and it was profound but perplexing, and I didn't have a sense of how to enact it in my life. You know, I didn't know what it meant. It was very moving and somewhat disturbing as well. And then shortly after that, I was randomly watching a video with Robert Sapolsky, the biologist,
Right.
and he's someone that I admire as well. He was being interviewed by people at the San Diego Pain Summit in 2016 for chronic pain issues, and someone just randomly asked him about transgender neurology, basically, and he was like, "Oh yeah, you know, trans people's brains are basically what they say they are. It's a pretty well established thing in neuroscience at this point, and you know, in the murky world of neuroscience, it's one of the more consistent things we've discovered so far." And I was just like, what, really? Like, you know, they found these neurological correlates, and I was just super excited, you know, and apparently this had been happening for a while. And that stuck with me too. It just has like this, like, oh, isn't that interesting? That's really curious that this thing
Yeah.
is real, but you know, I just couldn't shake it. It was just kind of working away in my brain alongside this other mystical thing. And at some point it just felt like it just hit me like, oh my God, this is me. This is my life. Something is missing and not clicking. And I can't embody the sense of agape for one thing, and it wasn't, you know, I'm not as selfless as that. There was also a profound sense of pain and
Sure, of course.
misery associated
Yeah.
with what they call gender dysphoria and lack of fittedness in the world, I would say, kind of primarily characterized it for me. So, you know, those two things were really formative for me in terms of my gender, my awakening gender identity, I guess you would say, maybe. But they pointed to, you know, an inner and an outer experience that were very separate,
Mm.
right? So like Sapolsky's, you know, commentary, and other scientists that I followed since then you know, we're talking about gender in a very objective way. You know, here's the neurology. You know, there are other people, of course, who define gender in terms of your external sexual characteristics entirely. And these were all, you know, lining up for me with what you would call like an empiricist view, kind of like this, you know, supposedly third person objective view of the world. And it didn't really afford me a lot of wisdom. You know, it was like,
Yeah.
great, so there is this reality here about, you know, related to my neurology and you know, other aspects of one's biology, but it didn't tell me like, okay, what do you do with that now? You know, I
Right.
just,
Right.
you know, you're not your brain in that sense.
Right. Right.
And then meanwhile, the inner world didn't have a way to express itself either, you know, and when I tried to get a sense of what different people's conceptions of how to gender transition, you know, should you transition, how would you do it, etc., I got a real mishmash of vaguely like romantic kind of
Right.
ideas,
Right.
you know,
Right.
that were
Right.
like,
Right.
you know,
Self-expression and all that.
yeah,
Yeah.
like self-expression, your identity, your creativity,
Yeah.
you know, whatever. And like you would say, you'd push that out into a meaningless world to create your own meaning. You know, and of course I was watching your videos at this time, so I was also getting this other direction coming in the background that slowly was creeping up in my head. But these commonly accepted, you know, I'm calling them folk, you know, models of gender for lack of a better term. I don't know if they would, you know, apply to or in the same way that, you know, your full conception of self that you
Yeah.
guys talk about in the Elusive Eye series, you know, I don't know if those are the same or not, but they
Well,
don't match each
they're
other.
at least folk epistemologies, right? So
Folk
sort of you
epistemologies.
know, and you know, sort of you know, folk romanticism and folk empiricism are very much the two dominant epistemologies. And so the fact that you
Uh-huh.
found both of them dissatisfactory, especially with respect to wisdom, I think that's a really telling insight on your part.
Mm. Yeah, it just, yeah, it felt like, you know, I'm watching your videos and I'm getting a sense of what it might mean to act more wisely, at least, or aspire
Yeah.
to act more wisely. And meanwhile, the gender thing, which was very salient in my life, was not lining up with this goal, I guess.
Right.
You
Right.
know, and so yeah, these epistemologies were like not satisfying. They didn't match each other. They didn't have they all seem to have a piece of the puzzle. You know, gender is sex, gender is sexuality, gender is neurology, gender is romantic projection, gender
Right.
as whatever else. Oh, social construct, you know, would be
Yeah.
another,
Yeah.
you know, purely a social construct, no reality besides that. That was one view I found a lot. And none of them, they all had like a piece of the puzzle, it seemed like, but none of them added up to the whole. And it started to feel like this was a much more complex, you know, I don't know if it would be an emergent thing, but it just felt like, you know, none of them made sense on their own. And they often came into conflict with each other, often in the same, you know, in the same kind of narrative from one person. Like, so a single
Yeah.
person might say, you know, gender is nothing but social construct and it's just like money or something. And then in the next minute, they would say gender is something I feel deeply inside and I have to like bring it out in the world and express myself and my identity.
Right. Right.
And it's like, this doesn't make any sense. It's not logical, you know, and it besides not affording me any kind of growth potential, you know, it just not, it didn't line up at all. And I'm trying not to be, I shouldn't be like dismissive of people's viewpoints because people feel really strongly about, you know, their internal
Sure.
sense, you know,
Yeah.
and I believe that's real because I've experienced it. But at the same time, I feel like people are being, I don't know, I at least felt misled by the
Mhm.
romantic framing around that. Whereas in the meantime, from your work, I was seeing that my experience of gender dysphoria had a lot more to do with what you would call like, you know, fittedness to your
Yep. Yep.
environment,
Yep.
especially your social environment, you know, and optimal grip and your agency. And I felt like all that stuff was not lining up, and it didn't have anything to do with what you would call propositional knowledge, you know, just factual knowledge
Yeah.
about, you know, what science says, or, you know, any of that stuff. Like didn't directly, you know,
Yeah.
help me in my need. So yeah, all of this stuff didn't make any sense, and I began to think like, okay, like clearly we're lacking a concept of gender period in our culture. And you know, there are just so many holes in all of these viewpoints. Like gender is a social construct. It was like, well, then why transition, and why is there neurology, and why is there such a deep-seated need, you know, for me to act in a different gendered way? You know, it just didn't make sense. You know, people say like, well, it's like a social concept, like construct like money. And it's like, well, our brains don't have like a money center that I know of in the
Mhm.
same way that they seem to have, certain at least minor differences based on sex,
Mhm.
and transgender people having, additional, you know, differences like the corpus callosum being, thickened beyond the norm and stuff like that, so it
Yes.
was like,
Yeah.
okay, neurologically there seemed to be something beyond just like a social construct happening. And I could go on with like all of the holes that I'm finding in all these different, framings or epistemologies, but like, even within societies there are different, just like there are different, apparently,
Yep.
selves, like you guys would talk about with Greg Enrique is talking about an ancient Egyptian self being,
Yeah.
different than what we experience, but that machinery of selfhood maybe being kind of the same,
Yep.
basic
Yep.
machinery behind
Yep.
the scenes,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So, looking at society, that didn't really help much either, because there didn't seem to be an absolute conception of gender between societies that matched up, like you would have these 3 to 5 genders in different Native American groups,
Right.
and
Right.
those wouldn't like make sense according to our gender system,
Yeah.
and so like none of them had like any kind of absolute reality that I could pin down. So you see where I'm kind of just like,
Yeah.
whoa, like I need a different working model for myself, at least. Other people have found other ways that work for them, but the romantic projection stuff really didn't work for me, because I felt like it ignored society, it ignored, what has existed before, and the societal stuff, and the anatomical stuff didn't make sense to me because it ignored the inner world. And
Mm.
so I really, got enamored of your concept of transactivity. And I
Right.
always have to
Right.
giggle a little at the pun with that, but just that feeling of inner and outer having to dialogue.
Mhm.
And that's how, your sense of what's relevant to you, what your meaning is created in yourself. And, if I'm getting that right. And it just really struck a chord with me, and it enabled me to then proceed into like a more aspirational sense of gender, where
Ah.
the relationship between me and the world could develop in an ongoing way, in this platonic kind of way, where I could learn more about myself, I could reflect back on the world, I could learn more about the world of gender and reflect back into myself. So using your work and Agnes Callard and L.A. Paul and a little bit of Nora Bateson and some other
Mhm.
people, I've really been a lot better served with that. So thank you very much for that, and your talking partners too,
Yeah.
for all that help. So that's, I guess, I don't know, I'll stop there for now, because that was kind of a long tail.
That's fine. Oh, wow. It's so rich. And I almost interjected a couple of times and then I held myself back because I wanted to hear what you were going to say next. There's so much going on there. I mean, I want to hear more about the mystical experience. I'm deeply interested in
Mhm.
them and how it called to you to engage in a kind of transformation.
Yeah.
And you touched on it, but the sense of dysphoria that you were talking about, and how for you've now come to see that as almost at the level of participatory knowing that there's an
Mhm.
agent arena misfit that's happening in some way.
Definitely.
And
Yeah.
then the adoption of the aspirational model, and then the connections, and you keep making reference to the elusive I. I mean, it's the Socratic aspirational model,
Mhm.
right? Because the,
Mhm.
the self is turning out to be a extremely complex and to some significant degree of mysterious phenomena that you're trying to get a purchase on in some way. And so and I am deeply impressed by the combination of humility that I see in you, right? And courage, which I think you're exemplifying some of the Socratic ideal. Like you're willing to
Thank
say,
you.
I'm not sure about this. I'm confused about this. I want to know more about this. And I found that really very, 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 very exemplary. So maybe that was just sort of, just.
Thank you. Much appreciated. Much appreciated.
So
Yeah.
let's go back and maybe try to do these one on one and maybe a little bit more dialogical. So tell me
Mhm.
more. You were willing to accept my redefinition that your mystical experience was very much an agapic experience. What was happening? Were you
Yes.
doing a practice? Did it come over you spontaneously? Is it the only
Yeah.
mystical experience you've had, or have there been others in your life?
It's a really good question. I have done, a fair amount of practice, both within the Buddhist context, the Taoist context, Tai Chi, martial arts, et cetera, that I think have at least set the stage for this
Mm,
last experience, or the one that I was referring to. And let's see, at the time, I hadn't really gotten into any of your like stoicism or any of those related practices. Not your stoicism, but
yeah, yeah,
the
yeah,
stuff that you've kind of like
yeah,
pointed toward. That's been really helpful. And I was just sort of, a lot of these just come on for me spontaneously. I have had them before, but they seem to be preceded by quite a great deal of personal work, meditative and
yeah,
otherwise.
yeah,
I was really benefited by a certain approach to Zen Buddhism that I don't think is practiced hardly anywhere except it was in Madison, Wisconsin, and it was a little Zendo that developed a way to work on your what they called natural koans, so based on Dogen's work
yeah,
of kind of the Genjo koan, the koan that springs from your own life naturally.
yeah,
And so they built kind of a system of working with that more reflectively, more consciously, and
yeah,
and that had really helped me a lot to set the stage for these kinds of experiences. And they just come on whenever,
yeah,
walking home, or in the case of the one I was referring to earlier, I was basically dozing off to fall asleep, and it just kind of felt like the whole universe was opening up inside and outside me, simultaneously. And it did feel like a very agapic sense of generosity, but it was something I wanted. It wasn't like
yeah,
something
yeah,
that
yeah.
I suddenly I'm like generous now because I'm totally enlightened, or whatever.
Right,
It
right,
was
right.
like, oh, it's just like, oh, I want that though. It's just like delicious and beautiful and this wonderful thing. So
So,
it sort of led, as an aside, I guess, in some of the more aspirational work I've tried to do around gender transition, it led me to select Kuan Yin as an
right,
icon.
right,
You
right,
know,
right. The
she being
Bodhisattva of compassion, just so people know.
right,
Yeah,
yeah, the Chinese Bodhisattva of compassion, and she's, this is probably, I don't know if how much I want to say, but to me, she's like a transgender bodhisattva because
right.
she started in India as Avalokiteshvara as a male, and the amount of suffering in the world caused her to explode into 1,000 pieces, and her heart broke, shattered basically, and
Yeah.
whoever put her, I guess whoever the bodhisattva repair people are that came and collected her, and fixed her up again. Fixed him up again at the time. We're like, oh well, maybe we'll have better luck as a female, so we'll just recreate this bodhisattva
Right,
as a
right,
female, and that's the more Chinese, one of the Chinese legends I heard about Kuan Yin, and so I was like, well, this is perfect,
right.
she really fits my goal, and that sense of compassion, agape. Yeah, really seemed to fit better than anything, so that was really nice.
That's really interesting about how you've picked up what I would call an imaginal thing, something,
Mhm.
right? An image that's not just in your imagination, like, but that you are through which you are aspiring to see more deeply into the world and be transformed. And so I'm invoking Corbin's notion of the imaginal as the way of trying to enact the transjective, and I see you doing
Yeah.
that. So you felt like called by this mystical experience. Did it have? I know you've watched some of my series. There's Hayden's notion. The thing I call ontonormativity, that it was somehow really real,
Mhm.
and it sort of
Mhm.
places this challenge or demand on you to conform to it. Is that yeah, okay, so that's what was going on there.
Def
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah, it did. Yeah. And again, I don't want to like, say like, oh, I'm only transitioning because of this selfless,
No, 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 no,
ontonormativity, but
no, no, no.
yeah, it's one way that I feel like it has gender transition has blended into that quest for wisdom, agape, and this reality, like you said, that is like just calls to you as something profound. I don't know if at the time it felt more real, but definitely more salient, just
Yep.
hugely salient. Like it
Right.
could be more real, I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah. That's a good way of putting it. So I like the fact that you are critical. I share this with you about both empiricism and
Mhm.
romanticism as being
Mhm.
inaccurate proposals, and you're proposing the aspirational model as better. so one thing I want to zero in on, because I think this is like, like when, as soon as you said it, I went, oh, like, why didn't I have that idea? It was such a good idea. It's like, yeah, the transition that, you know, the gender transition, right? We tend to think of this as, oh, like, oh my gosh, this is violating all kinds of ontological categories, that, right? But then, you know, if you read the ancient literature, if you read Plato and Socrates, the transition from the normal person to the sage is also regarded as such a huge and ontological, you know, transformation. I mean, so I carry around, just to show how I try to live this, I carry around a little frog, because this, in the Neoplatonic tradition, we're like frogs, because we start out in one world like fish, we're water dwelling creatures, and then we move to another world in which we can live in the air, on land. And so this is supposed to be a model of the kind of transformation and metamorphosis that you will go through when you're cultivating wisdom. And so I thought, right. The best literature for people who are seeking guidance, right? Think about it the two ways. The best literature, first of all, if you're seeking guidance, you should go to the wisdom literature, because that's what wisdom is about. It's about guidance. And the second is the wisdom literature, when it talks about, as you mentioned, L.A. Paul, Agnes Callard, I would even say people as, you know, Iris Murdoch, right? It's talking about a transformation equally as radical, if not more radical. And then the way you acknowledge that by, you know, the gender transformation is situated within the sapiential. I just thought, like, sorry, it's like when somebody, I just appreciate when like, sorry, this sounds selfish and it shouldn't. It sounds, it sounds egocentric, and it's not. So try to erase those meanings. Like when I said, why didn't I have that insight? That's such a good insight. That's such a profound realization. Can you tell me a little bit more about how that came to be for you?
How the insight that gender transition could be situated within the sapiential.
Yeah, I mean, you've given sort of the biographical story, but what I'm asking more is like, what's the thinking? I mean, I know you're not by profession a philosopher, but you are philosophically inclined. I think that's fair to say. So, like, what's your philosophical reflection on this? That's a brilliant insight, and it's obviously not just a conceptual or propositional thing, like you said. This is Socratic philosophia. This is the kind of insight you can embody and enact. So, can you unpack that a little bit more? Open it up a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, I'll do my best for sure. Yeah. I think it came on gradually, that this kind of understanding through like watching your videos, watching your dialogues with Nora Bateson, and then reading some of the books we mentioned. When you talked with Nora, you guys had this really great like small conversation that I wish had gone on for like 2 hours about authenticity.
Right.
And, you know, like you were talking about Heidegger and how his definition of authenticity had been like twisted around like
very
the
much
opposite way, you know, and she was saying, you know, from a different direction, but criticizing it as like, how do I just like rip out some parts of myself and those are the authentic ones and the other ones are not, you know? So there's this paradox of like to will yourself to be authentic is to be inauthentic automatically. You know, and this was jarring up against in my head against like the comment, you know, be authentic, you know, be your authentic self, just express your authenticity, you know, which you guys are both like, no, this is not a satisfactory idea of what authenticity even is. And then I just started to think of it as relational, you know, as like as Nora was talking about, you know, an authentic relationship. I think I don't remember exactly what she said, but what I took from it was that, you know, an authentic relationship would include the most possible, you know, would include the most aspects of myself and others as well. And if I am at a deeply participatory level, jarring up against myself and society, if I don't fit, if I, you know, then I can't get an optimal grip, and then I don't have agency properly. I'm, you know, if I'm hiding or repressing or ignoring parts of myself that are significant, you know, the solution was not to say like, oh, I'll just make up something to express and I'll do that. It's like, okay, I really need to look at these in a deeper sense and examine them. Like, what am I holding back? For what am I really holding back? That is myself, versus, you know, versus creating another two-dimensional caricature of myself to replace the pre-transition one, if that makes sense. So I didn't
Oh,
want to go into transition and create like a cartoon character of a trans person or something.
right, right.
So that was really helpful right there. And thinking of gender. And then I began to think of gender more as relational in my head, as just this kind of thing that happened transactively between you and society, basically. And based maybe earlier in civilization. I don't even know where gender roles are at right now, to be honest. They seem like
Yeah,
they're in chaos, but
yeah,
in work roles or whatever, like
yeah,
delineating the work of society, it seemed to be kind of a big part of it. So I kind of started to think of it as primarily relational and not something inside or outside. And that was like, oh, breath of fresh air. I've got this opening where I can finally move around in here, and really explore. Um, another great moment was reading L.A. Paul's work, Transformative
yeah.
Experience, and
Brilliant book. Yeah,
yeah, like you've said, it's got this wonderful insight that when you have a really transformative experience, like you and your world are both shifted to the degree where you can't anticipate what your values will be, how
yeah,
what you'll be
yeah,
like, what your world
yeah,
will even be like, and so you can't make like, I guess, traditional decision making.
yeah,
I
yeah,
don't know decision theory, but you just can't apply decision theory to those situations apparently. So that's, she even mentioned gender
yeah,
dysphoria in that book briefly, and it really spoke to me as like, yes, this is
yeah,
so true. Like prior to transition, I was like, what am I gonna be? Who am I gonna be? Will things
yeah.
that are precious to me change? Will I lose those? What will I lose
Wow.
parts of myself that I don't want to? You know, um, Etc. So that was, it spoke to me deeply. But she posed the question sort of, but didn't at the time have an answer completely for it. um to my mind, it wasn't her answer that well, people who just want transformation will just seek out transformative experiences, and that could be any kind of transformation. And
Right.
that seemed, like Agnes Callard pointed out, a little too broad, I guess. Or
Yeah, 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 yeah.
didn't fit people's situations very well. But she was super helpful nonetheless, and she didn't really emphasize things that I think are important about, for me, gender transition, like serious play, like you've talked about,
Right, right.
iconography, stuff like that.
Yeah,
That came more with Callard, and reading Agnes Callard's book Aspiration,
yeah,
and seeing like, oh, okay, here is a link to John's perspectival and participatory
yeah,
knowledge,
yeah,
because to truly aspire to become someone better, to become someone literally with different values, and then therefore a different world than you now have, you need to get down to those layers of participatory involvement, and that also is innately social to a large degree. She
yeah.
talks about how much your aspiration depends on other people kind of midwifing that process,
Very
along
systematic.
with you,
Yeah.
because you don't know where you're going, and the normative values are coming from your future self that you're aspiring to. So how are you going to get there by yourself, right? So
So,
that was very, very helpful. And then you added some tidbits to that in a question and answer video about, well, we should think more about serious play with regard to that, and all the things that you talk about,
yeah,
in your series and in your videos. So I've been thinking more about how serious play then, can be useful, how I can use, oh geez, just a lot of the things that you had touched on in your Awakening from the Meaning Crisis series, like working on resolving kind of a perspectival clash through
yeah.
chanting the Bodhidharma's Buddhist 10 precepts while putting on makeup and stuff like.
Right,
I was kind of just
yeah,
working on all these experiments, to see what I could do to enhance the transformative process, and really glean whatever wisdom I could from it as well, in a deeper sense, because I do believe that the transition to becoming a sage, so to speak, is enormous. It dwarfs, I would say it dwarfs gender
yep,
transition, but that's actually dismissive of a lot of people's experience of gender transition, because it's also life shattering in some cases. So
yes.
but both
But
can be deadly. I mean, Socrates, for instance.
yeah, very, very much, very
you
much.
know
Um, so yeah, and I think your identification with Kuan Yin has also been a species of serious play for you,
yes.
very much.
Yes, that's where I'm trying to pick up on your work on, talking about icons and sacred second self
Yep, yep, that very
stuff.
much, very much. Yeah, the way you're implementing, uh, I don't know. I'm very touched by it. It's like
Hmm.
I'm glad when people want to discuss my ideas and they learn from them, but when people can appropriate them, all right, and internalize them, the way you've done that, that's deeply, deeply encouraging. So thank you for
That's
that.
wonderful. Yeah, and I think I'm hoping that what I'm saying here can apply for people who have, no interest in gender transition or even gender whatsoever, but
No, but
whatever's
that's the
going on
point.
with their life,
That's exactly the point. I mean, I think you're getting very even keeled on this. You're saying this is an important issue, and the wisdom, the wisdom tradition or whatever we want to call it, can help us a lot. But the reverse is also the case, right? Right, and that's what you're doing. You're saying you're basically getting the two to reciprocally open to each other, which I think is
Yes.
really, really powerful. And I also like the humility. One of the things that I find off-putting, I have to be careful here because I am on the outside and I'm acknowledging that.
Mhm.
What I find off-putting is the epistemological claims. I'm not talking about
Mhm.
people who are transitioning, but often they speak this decadent romanticism or empiricism, and they speak with a kind of knowledge. They make claims to knowledge that I think go against what L.A. Paul and Agnes Callard and Socrates argued when we're going through
Mhm.
these fundamental transitions, and we're aspiring to wisdom, or we're aspiring to a sacred second self. Like we have to be we have to have a lot of humility, or we are being disingenuous about the situation we're facing in such a radical transformation. That's what I hear you saying, and you're not here, but you're expressing it with courage. You're not expressing it with any sort of pity me or anything. You're no, you're. I'm not saying that people aren't deserving of compassion. What I'm saying is, what am I trying to say? I'm not getting any sense from you of articulating this humility in any kind of narcissistic fashion. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm trying to
Oh,
say.
okay. Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it because I do want this to be, useful, I guess, to people in, either gender transition or whatever aspiration they're, your work has applied to me specifically in this one way, but then I'm seeing how one aspiration can then give birth to another, and you
Exactly.
can use those lessons,
That's what I'm so excited about. This idea that, like, again, the way you're like, this is like almost a design feature of an ecology of practices,
Yes,
that
yeah,
you get a linkage between different aspirational projects, and they reciprocally open and afford each other. I thought, wow,
yes,
yes, that's impressive.
that's totally it. Yep.
Can you segue then into now the other part? Because the other part,
Mhm.
right, your professional thing is
Yeah,
more specifically around the wisdom aspiration, the
it
Philia
is.
Sophia. So can you
Yeah,
open up about that? Because I've also found this very fascinating. What you're trying to do, you're trying to build a community of ecology of practices.
I am. Yes, and that's kind of a um, my specific profession is peer support. So I work in kind of this like para-mental health, quote unquote, field where I do a lot of, I describe peer support practice as like a non-hierarchical relational approach to well-being, that often, is more about looking outward on society together. So you're building, a relationship together and helping this person fit again in society in a way where there's that give and take
Yep.
between them
Yeah.
and the world, so it's less about fixing them and more about, what are the sources of meaning in their world, that relate to them, mattering to something larger, making
Yep.
sense of their world, etc. So my money making work, feeds into my other passion, which has become to develop this wisdom fostering community locally, in the spirit of, what you and I've seen others on your show have started to do, and started to network,
Mm.
between each other. So that for me starts with a basis in the body. Another reason I was attracted to your work initially, and I've watched your talks with Rafe Kelly a little bit, and those were
Yep.
really helpful
Yep.
too.
Yeah.
Because he's taking this body work, this body centric work, and then exapting it for wisdom production, so to
Yeah.
speak,
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
Um,
Very much.
and that, yeah. And so I wanted to start with our martial arts school locally, and figure out ways to use maybe the relational methodology of peer support practice or whatever other practices, some of the circling stuff, which I haven't done any of, or Nora Bateson's Worm Data Lab, which I haven't done yet either, but to create like a relational, dialogical element, because I've been convinced by your work and others that is really essential to
Hmm.
fostering wisdom, and that we're lacking those communities in society right now, big time. So starting with the basis in martial arts, adding on maybe some dialogical practices or incorporating those somehow, meditation,
Hmm.
possibly arts, music, whatever people want to do to sort of enhance that. And I definitely am far from putting that together in any kind of cohesive way, but that's where I'm, that's why I'm your Patreon Patreon supporter and talking
Yeah.
to you.
Well, and I'm very committed to helping you with that project, because I mean, I'm very much about not just talking about this stuff, but trying to help and facilitate, building the communities and building the community of communities, steal the culture, as I say.
Mhm.
So when I meet people of,
Yes.
good faith like you are, putting, good time and good talent to bear on this transformational process. I want to help as much as I possibly can. So a little bit of your background as a martial artist. How long have you been a martial artist? What martial arts do you practice? Things like that.
Yeah, oh boy. Kind of a mishmash, to be honest, and I've sort of honed in. I just love Tai Chi. I've just loved it for a long time, and I've bounced to other things and back again. And Yang style, I've done the so-called private style and the public style of Yang Tai Chi, and still do those. And I've recently adopted Okinawan karate based on a school that's local to me, and I really enjoy that a lot. Surprisingly, becoming middle-aged and just suddenly getting into karate is kind of the opposite
Yeah, yeah,
direction you're supposed to go, but it added a lot to me, mentally and emotionally. It just that the fierceness of it really did something for me, and actually enabled me, I think, also to face the dual transitions that I'm kind of looking at right now.
right,
So
right.
that was, very helpful, and it's, kind of what I'm obviously trying to help other people get to is forming that basis in themselves to aspire. Um, and then I've done, I wouldn't say I've done more than really a little bit of Bujinkan, Budo Taijutsu, so like Japanese, like samurai jujitsu, ninjutsu,
Yeah,
a little bit of that. I would say karate and Tai Chi are my two big loves, along with Qigong and seated meditation and stuff like
right,
that.
right. And so, and the meditation style you've done, is it largely sort of a traditional, like Buddhist style? Is that like Vipassana, or is it Zazen, or which is it? Uh,
Mainly Zazen for a long time. It was very much like the, just sit, follow your breath, just be there, be present.
right,
It had benefits. It definitely had a stabilizing influence in my life. But then that more natural koan approach to Zen Buddhism,
right.
still a Soto Zen school, still a slow path,
Yeah,
of awareness kind of school. But that really helped bring in something a little more. It combined the mental and the physical more for me.
right, right.
So that was good. And then with your work recently, I've started to incorporate the Vipassana, the Metta more, and now the kind of more, Greek traditions, some
Yeah,
Stoic, the view from above, stuff like that.
right, right, right.
Kind of testing the buffet out to see, what plate's going to look well together here.
Yeah, and a very significant serious play. So I mean, you ruthlessly self-promote. Like, what could people do to help you build your wisdom dojo?
Oh, geez. Well, I would love to talk to people who are doing anything similar, who have, even if they're not doing anything similar and they want to do something similar, like what are their needs? I really love when if anyone has insight into what martial arts or even like, ballet, whatever, has done for them in a more wisdom related or personal way, like how do these practices help you beyond the physical, first of all? And how have they helped people? Because I'm trying to, like, I look at what you're doing and you're talking about, exacting
Yep,
different things. And so it's like, well, what's working already? What are these
yep,
practices doing well? And then let's
exactly. Yeah,
retrofit the system
Yeah.
to make that happen more efficiently if we can. So anyone who's, who's involved in this stuff, or even has been like, wow, my life has really transformed. I was doing karate and suddenly the moon came
Yeah.
out from behind the clouds and I was one with everything, like that kind of stuff really
Yeah.
fascinates me too.
So I'll take from you, and we'll put it in the links to this video, the description. We'll put links to how people can reach you, that you
Yeah,
feel comfortable with. Um,
wonderful.
so where are you at right now? Like, how are things sitting for you right now? It sounds like, it sounds like you're you're still on the horizon of intelligibility. I get that, but it sounds
Mhm.
like there's more clarity for you now. Am I reading you correctly?
Yeah, I think so. I've got a sense of at least a grip on the grip, so to speak,
Right,
an
right,
optimal grip on the optimal grip,
right, right.
where I need to be in terms of making progress. Makes a lot more sense to me. I'm still, as I'm developing, my iconography and how to relate to divine doubles and things like that
Yeah,
more effectively. And I do want to kind of try to take whatever I've gleaned from my own journey and use it. I mentor a lot of LGBT plus youth right now.
yeah,
Try to help people, get away from maybe some of the confusion around gender issues, even in
right.
themselves. So I'm starting to kind of, I guess I'm at some kind of turning point where I've started to look at like, okay, how can this now help other people in addition to me? So something must have shifted in me, I guess. That's what I'm trying to say.
Well, that's what I find so attractive. I find there's the genuine realization of enhanced clarity without any claims to certainty. That's what I find so refreshing. It's like things are getting clearer. I'm making more sense. I can help other people, but that doesn't mean I've achieved some certainty or finality. And I find that very, very encouraging. Uh, so, if you could, would you want to eventually, like, well, I know it's your vocation to have the
Mhm.
wisdom dojo. Would you want that to be your profession eventually? Is that what you're aspiring to, or you're unsure about that, or?
Unsure, but peer support is a lovely practice as well, and
Right.
I have fallen in love with it in the last few years because I guess maybe some of your viewers have watched Greg Enriquez talking about the limitations of psychology practice. I think that
Yep.
was in a
Yep. Yep.
dialogue with Jordan Hall. And he was kind of like, the person leaves the room and then they're not your friend anymore.
Yep.
They
Yep.
were just
Yep.
crying on your couch or whatever,
Yep. Yep.
and you don't know them from Adam or Eve at this point. So um, I think it's such a great bridge piece for society right now, and we need that. We need like like social health, so to speak. And it's affording me a chance to really, in some cases, I think I'm really, doing like a dialogos will emerge with my participants in that practice.
Oh, that's
You know,
interesting. That's very interesting.
like I'll ask some questions. What do you think gender is? How does it play out? Well, okay, what about this other thing you said? And then we'll both develop wisdom as part of that process. If it or whatever the subject might be at hand, that we're talking about. We'll both develop wisdom from that subject if I'm engaging in it in a kind of, I guess, more Socratic way,
Yeah.
um, hopefully. And that's fascinating to me because it's like it's not a practice where I'm doing mental health on someone, and I know a lot of therapists don't think of it that way either. Um, but it's just this really great, emergent sense of like interpersonal like third space, where that space itself is doing, and I say like let the
Yeah.
relationship do the work,
Yeah. Yeah. The logos. Yeah. The
the
logos.
logos emerges, yes.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you
Very
know
much.
and it's
Yeah.
like with a kid who's like 14 years old or whoever it is, it could be anybody. I'm just like, this is amazing work. And it doesn't end necessarily, you can go to an ice cream parlor and have ice. You don't have to just sit in an office and do it. So it helps to bridge, you know you in society, the person in society, your relationship in society, and really get into like a more holistic way of looking at mental health to me. So I just love that practice, and I feel like at some point, like your work and that practice are going to be more together. But it's starting to happen in these moments where I'm like, oh, this is also drawing. So I'm a little bit drawn in like 7 different directions in case that's not obvious. but maybe that martial arts system, you know, I mean, I do practice martial arts with some of the participants in the
Right,
programs I
right.
work in, you know, but that could all kind of be combined as a one-on-one approach for, you know, mental, I always put mental health in quotes in these
Their well-being, at
situations.
least. Yeah.
Well-being, yeah.
So,
Yeah,
so maybe as a final question, because we're coming near the end of the time.
sure.
So you talked about, just to go back to the beginning, but I want to draw in everything you've said. Um, you had this mystical experience, but you really, the culture didn't have anything to do with it. Like it couldn't help you with it, basically, right?
Right.
And then you're going through this aspirational project, and the culture is giving you all this conflicting information, and you know, those are two sort of defining features of the meaning crisis that we have.
Mhm.
We feel a particular call, we feel an in-depth experience, or we feel that we're engaged in a project of aspirational self-knowledge, not just self-assertion.
Mhm.
And the culture just is useless in many
Yep.
ways, confusing or ignorant, or and you
Embroiled
articulate,
in political fights,
yeah,
whatever.
political fights that are ultimately not about the issue that the political fight claims it's about, and
Yeah.
et cetera, et cetera.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
so what I heard you saying, and if I'm wrong, please correct me. I heard you saying, well, you found, you know, in this work, you found this other cognitive cultural grammar, and that's helped you, and you have this aspiration. One way you could put that, and see if this, like, riff on this, is it land or right? One way you could put that is you had an experience of a kind of sacredness,
Mhm.
and the society has either moribund or confused uh, advice on how to integrate, internalize, and incorporate, remembering that that means originally to embody, incorporate
Mhm. Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
uh, that sacredness, and that you I should phrase the question, are you now coming into a more right relationship with sacredness? Do you feel that you have a relationship to the sacred that is now more intelligible and viable for you than previously?
Definitely, yes. And I think I could illustrate that, you know, with one incident that happened recently where I, you know, after months of taking hormones, you know, I looked in the mirror and my face, I looked like a different person in that moment, and I hadn't, you
Yeah,
know, up to that point. And it you know, changed my sense of the me, you know, who I was looking at, but also
right,
it
right,
reflected back on the I, like, well, who's looking then?
right, right.
And it started to really get into this feeling of like this again, the emptiness of self, or the, you know,
Yeah,
that
yeah, yeah,
more fluid sense of self that feels really sacred, that ties back into that
yeah,
mystical experience where there's this openness to me, and the self seems to also, in an aspirational sense, you know, I'm eager to hear what you guys say in the next few videos, but that, you know, the me now and the me of the future, there's also a self like
yeah,
navigating
yep,
between
yep,
those.
yep, yep.
And that feels like profoundly sacred to me. And I feel more whole, and therefore my world, you know, ends up being more whole. My relationships with others have improved. My work has gotten better. People have reflected this back on me, so I feel like I'm
Great.
on
Yeah,
basically the right path, you know, for those reasons, like you've described.
yeah, yeah.
And it does feel like there's something like really wondrous about the whole process. You know, it could be, you know, horror and it could be wonder, but it's, you know, if it's, I think with aspiration and grounding and community, then you can produce wonder and awe, and you can grow from that, rather than being like, well, you know, being transgender is intercategorical, so
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
this thing I have to either shove out of my head, or I have to make a quick decision based on,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know, not non-sacred, I guess, ideas, or
That's also brilliant. Yeah, yeah. I mean, if you allow me to use your word, I mean, cultivating awe is the best way to deal with the potential horror, right? So, you know, you know, Pandora's box. You know, the everyday thing is, you know, all the horrors are left, and then hope is put in there, and then you have like the Heideggerian reason that hope is actually the worst thing, and it's left in there. And then
Oh, okay.
I've sort of, and I've largely experienced hope as a negative thing in my life, but I'm coming to see this that hope is actually a response to horror. I mean, what we need when we face horror is hope. When we apply hope outside of situations of horror, I think we can get into magical hope, and we can stay in abusive relationships and all. But when we're confronting sort of those aspects, um,
Like the hope within the horror, like
yeah. So
not in the
and that's exactly what I think awe is. Awe is awe is right. I'm being overwhelmed, and if this continues, I will fall into horror. But within it, there's a positive sense of hope. There's a sense of I will
Yeah.
accommodate fast enough somehow, and right, and
Yes.
that's what awe is. And so that sense
Uh,
of awe as a way of doing an aspect shift on horror, I thought that's really
yeah.
really good. What I like about that is you see many different other kinds of reactions. You see people who are transitioning, and I have students who transition. I talk to people. Again, I will say I'm on the outside. I'm just saying how I see it. I see many different reactions. I see people who are very wounded in the process and by the process. I don't mean that they made the wrong decision. I mean, but
Right.
it seems that like their primary existential response is wounding. I've seen other people. Yep. I've seen people react anger. So right. This is a way of there's a lot of anger. And not unjustified. There's a lot of abuse that's directed at people that are transitioning. I get that. Uh, but and so I'm not trying to dismiss this. I'm just trying to observe it, because I want to note that I'm sure you've suffered a lot. And the fact that what you take out of this from this aspirational model is awe and wonder, rather than resentment or self-pity, or being sort of permanently wounded, or being angry, or being resentful, or being antagonistic. Uh, I mean, that's deeply impressive. I think that bespeaks the value of the approach that you're advocating for. I
Yes.
just wanted to note that
Very
because
much.
the fact that you are able to situate this within this bigger project that is exposing you, that's not even the right word, affording you and enabling you into awe and wonder, and a sense of being more deeply connected to what's sacred. I think that's just really commendable. It'd be wonderful if more people considered this as a framing. I mean, going out on a bit of a limb, because I know this is always contentious, no matter what you say about this.
Yeah. If you say
But
transgender, someone is going to be mad just with that word.
yeah,
So
yeah,
how it goes.
but the possibility that more people would consider this as a framing of
Yeah.
right, of the transitioning process and of being transgendered, rather than the romantic or the empiricist or the positivistic or the will to power or the resentful. Like, this seems to be a growth oriented, Socratically valuable framing of what's going on. And that's why I wanted you to talk, because I just think it's
Yeah.
so valuable. So I wanted to thank you for that.
Oh, yes. And yeah, you're welcome. And thank you, because that's you and others have made it possible for me to reframe that and avoid some of that wounding and that, reciprocal narrowing that would have
Yeah,
likely ensued for me,
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
not a special person. I just came across this stuff, and it just really, really has helped. And I think it could help people in many, many different similar situations of difficulty that require personal transformation, any, those intrinsic inner conflicts that people are facing. So that would be my hope, that like we can step out of the culture wars 2.0, as they say,
yeah,
a little
yeah,
bit, and
yeah,
think about things in terms of like, how can we deal with this? How can we step back and look at it and be whole about it, but also encounter a sense of the sacred in the process and really glean from it, more wisdom and insight into ourselves and the world. So like all that you've done has really, it's really, I can't say enough about you and all your dialogos, partners and friends on this YouTube channel. So yeah, thank you.
Well, I thank you. Thank you so much, Rachel, for embodying it, and for like proposing the sapiential framing as an alternative to the medical or the political framing. I think that's a valuable one, a valuable alternative, and a proposal that people should seriously consider. So thank you so very much.
Great. Yeah, thanks again.